So for this panel, we're going to be talking about workers and the semiconductor industry. And to facilitate the panel, I am honored to introduce Fred Yamashita, who is the Executive Director and the Secretary-Treasurer of the Arizona AFL-CIO, and has been in that role since 2017. Before that, Fred spent 20 years with UFCW Local 99, and before that, worked on the floor of the grocery industry for 20 years. He was the chair of the Pima Area Labor Federation from 2015 until moving back to Phoenix to accept the position as executive director. And Fred also told me that he has 5 children and 2 grandchildren. So with that, thank you, Fred, and welcome, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you, Judith. So I just wanted to say thank you to Sanjeev, because something that he said really resonated was, what are the lessons that we've learned? And as someone that grew up, was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, in the pollution-filled skies of Zug Island, we later saw this really popular movie called Erin Brockovich decades later. And now here we are fighting the same fights. So what are the lessons that we've learned? And I know that we've had victories along the way, and I think that's what buoys us and helps us continue. And so, you know, as the headlines here in Phoenix tell us that we are becoming the epicenter of America's high-tech future with chip plants, billions of dollars in investment, and promises of thousands of good jobs. And we want to believe that. We know good jobs can change lives, families, and communities. The growing demand for technology has signaled a new era for labor in Arizona. But we've seen how innovation can sometimes come with a catch. Workers left without a voice, project labor agreements stalling out, unutilized apprenticeship programs, and outside contractors coming in while local workers watch from the sidelines. So, I ask, who is benefiting? And are these jobs safe? That's why this conversation, the dark side of the chip, matters. It's about making sure progress doesn't leave people behind. Technology will always keep changing, but one thing we should never change is that workers, union members, must have a seat at the table. So to kick things off, I want to pose a question to guide our discussion today. It's more of a 2-part or maybe 2 separate questions. But we've been told that semiconductor production will create good jobs for our communities. Is this the whole story? And then secondly, what should we know about the challenges for workers and organized labor? To help us unpack these questions, we have 3 incredible panelists. Annabelle Ferris-Camello, with over 25 years of experience. She directs the Community Engaged Labor Studies program at the University of California, Berkeley, through her joint appointment at the Center for Labor Research and Education and the Goldman School of Public Policy. Our second panelist, and though I don't have a long introduction, I'm sure it could be much longer. Ben Fong is the Associate Director for the Center for Work and Democracy at ASU. And then our third panelist, Daniel Kochen, is a lawyer who specializes in representing workers in disputes against corporations. He serves as lead counsel in class action discrimination lawsuits challenging corporations' use of visa programs to source labor of a predominantly single race and national origin to staff American jobs. Each panelist will share their insights for about 10 minutes, and each then We'll open it up for, after that, we'll open it up for audience questions and discussion. So our first panelist, Annabelle, it's all yours.
Thank you, Brother Fred, and thank you for being here. My first encounter with the industry, the tech manufacturing industry, was in the early 1990s when I was a labor organizer in Silicon Valley, organizing mainly Asian immigrant women workers who are facing health hazards on the job. I went on to do my PhD research in the early 2000s on a comparison of Silicon Valley and what was then called Silicon Valley of India, doing the same thing, understanding the tech manufacturing growth strategies and the conditions or impact on workers and communities. And since then, I've been doing research and policy analysis for over 25 years. I've served as a technical advisory committee member of the Global Electronics Council to look at criteria for social and environmental sustainability. I'm on the board of the International Campaign for Responsible Technology. And there are some recurrent themes, as you're already beginning to recognize. But I'd like to spend my time today unpacking three particular dominant narratives that we have been sold. The first is that chips manufacturing in the US is in the national interest. This is reminiscent of what I understand or remember from my labor studies teaching and classes is what's good for General Motors is good for the country, and vice versa. And it ties together corporate success with manufacturing jobs and economic success for communities, despite the misquoted words. And let us be clear that just like General Motors, the players involved in the tech industry are not mom and pop shops that should be rescued by the American public and American public funds. These companies are taking billions of dollars in the US as well as other countries. For example, Micron, which has received billions from the US government, has also taken the equivalent amount from the Indian government. So the left hand and the right hand know exactly what they're doing. It's a global strategy. In comparison, the CEO management package, compensation package, and the worker median pay is 200 to 1, or was that in 2023. Now, chips, as you know, go into all different types of end products, whether it's household appliances, cars, transportation, medical equipment, office equipment, and warfare equipment. And we know that the last is the most lucrative. So when we're talking about jobs in the national interest, we have to unpack where the money is going. The second myth or narrative that we need to unpack is talent shortage. The industry keeps saying that they are not finding skilled workers to fill the jobs that they need. And so the conclusions from that are, one, individual workers are flawed and need to be skilled up, trained. This ignores the fact that there are millions of workers without college degrees who are hungry for good jobs. They are unemployed or underemployed or in dead-end jobs and are eager to get into good jobs. And let's talk about what good jobs are in a minute. So the first corollary is individuals are flawed. The second corollary is our educational institutions are flawed. But the answer to that tends to be training of 10 days, 3 days, just to plug workers into these jobs. Let's get to the third myth. How many jobs are actually being created? So there's the question of quantity, and then there's the question of which jobs are being created. There are jobs directly linked to the semiconductor industry, and then there are indirect jobs that are lumped together in the numbers that we are seeing in the press. We need to be able to separate out which jobs are being created. There's construction work, which requires masons, electrical workers, plumbers, painters, iron workers, etc. And then there are production workers. These are both engineering for research and development, equipment maintenance, and so on. And then there are technicians, machine operators, fabricators, assemblers, metal workers, plastic workers. And we need to judge from the descriptions of both the quantity and the quality we are getting, are these good jobs? So the myth about jobs needed needs to be punctured. The Bureau of Labor Statistics have actually specified that the number of jobs needed or that will expand is closer to, rather than 1 million, as the private sector claims by 2030, the BLS claims that it will be roughly in the 400,000, which is a minuscule amount. It's actually a modest number of 3,000 a year, not more than that. Are these going to be good jobs? Well, the Department of Commerce and the Department of Labor under the Biden-Harris administration came up with a list of good jobs principles. They have been rescinded. If you try to do a Google search on the good jobs principles, they are nowhere available. And yet we know what these good jobs should be. Instead, what we have are flexible workforce, which means that the jobs will be subcontracted, outsourced, and will most likely go through indirect labor intermediaries, not on the direct payrolls of these multinationals receiving the millions of dollars, billions of dollars from the US government. Silicon Valley exported a business model all over the world, which is temporary, permanent workforce, so perma-temps, which still continues all over wherever semiconductor manufacturing is happening or wherever electronics manufacturing is happening. This means that workers are kept on temporary contracts year after year after year and not eligible for benefits and protections of permanent employees under labor law of any country. A large portion of these are subcontracted out to such small contractors that they don't fall under any purview of any law. I'd like to invoke the spirits of 3 workers who should not remain nameless or faceless while we're talking about labor conditions. One is a worker I came across in Silicon Valley, Rodrigo Cruz, a young Filipino immigrant worker with young children at the time who exercised his right to refuse dangerous work, was sent down a sewage, toxic sludge container with faulty equipment, a pipe that was just taped with duct tape. He was exposed for just seconds in this toxic sludge, had to be pulled out, and was considered brain dead on the spot. We fought for 2 years to get Rodrigo Cruz's family compensated, and it was failed. This was Romic Technologies, a recycling plant in Silicon Valley. Second story of Ambika, 22-year-old worker in India who lost her life because she was trying to resolve a situation in the machinery that she was working on and got her head and neck caught in the machinery. Again, decapitated and died. The third worker was right here in northern Phoenix, a truck driver, 41-year-old Cesar Aguiano Gitron, who was killed in May of 2024, when he, even though he was a truck driver, went to check out a situation in a waste tank, was struck by a blunt object, and was blown 20 feet. away from the truck he was supposed to drive away from the construction site at TSMC, just miles from here. What I'd like to emphasize is that these are not incidental events, they are preventable deaths, and it's the business model that is still current in the industry that needs to be held accountable. The business model puts production pressures, performance targets on individual workers that then leads to what amounts to corporate negligence. So we need to ignite our collective imagination to envision the characteristics of good jobs. We need to flex our collective muscle across issues, across organizational boundaries and national borders to demand safe, healthy, community-sustaining, great jobs for all workers wherever the industry exists or plans to grow. Thank you.
Brenda's the clicker over here? Okay, oh, great, okay. I'll just, I'll go up here. All right, good morning, everyone. So my name is Benjamin Fong. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Work and Democracy at Arizona State University. And I'm really honored to be invited to speak here today, but I'm not an expert. I mainly study labor and logistics, so happy to talk about that with anyone if you want. I do bear an interest in manufacturing and the recent wave of reindustrialization on and near shoring. So happy to be asked to present some limited findings today. And the two things I'm going to focus on here are just wages and workplace safety, sort of emphasizing some of the things that were said on the morning's panel. There's obviously a lot more to the job than just these two things, but I've only got 10 minutes, and so I want to focus on those. Sorry, this is a little bit wonky, but a lot of what I do is I just look at numbers that people commonly cite, and I dig into them for myself to sort of see what else is going on. So a lot of this is contextualizing some of the stuff said earlier. Oops. There we go. So this is from a 2021 report of the Semiconductor Industry Association. That's the standard industry association, from what I'm led to believe. And the report is called Chipping In, the Positive Impact of the Semiconductor Industry on the American Workforce and How Federal Industry Incentives Will Increase Domestic Jobs. And there's some pretty wild claims made here. So they estimate that there's about 277,000 Americans that work in the semiconductor industry. About 2/3 are manufacturers, and 1/3 are in the at the fabless design firms like NVIDIA. And they make this claim here. It's highlighted there. It's sort of light, but they say that wages are on average $170,000 a year. Boy, I wish that was true of academia. $170,000 a year sounds pretty good. This is the breakdown by occupation. The two most common are in architecture and engineering. The average wage is $226,000 a year. And in production, it says it's $94,000 a year. So again, this is from an industry report. This is what they claim. And if you look down at the bottom, it says it's a combination of you can't read that at all. It's a combination of BLS data, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and what they call the OE, the Oxford Economics tabulations, and I'll get to that in a second. So these are the numbers that I pulled, and sorry, this is basically unreadable. I'll try to explain a little bit more. So the thing is that if you look at the actual BLS numbers from 2019, they are much, much lower, like radically lower, like nowhere in the ballpark. So if you look at the second column there, 2019 percentage of total employment, it's the exact same as this previous slide. So they're clearly using manufacturing and semiconductors data for this slide or for this table. But they're not saying a lot of different things. So if you look at that fourth column there, 2019 annual mean wage, sorry, I'm turning. I said I wouldn't turn. 2019 annual mean wage. For architecture and engineering, it's $95,000 according to BLS data. They claim it's $226,000, so a lot lower. If you look down at production, which is what Judith mentioned earlier, they claim $94,000, but the 2019 BLS data showed $40,000 a year. How is that the case? Are they just lying? Maybe. So the first thing is that this data, it comprises NAICS, that's the industry code 334400, which is semiconductor and other electronic component manufacturing. And you could say that maybe production in other electronics just pays a lot lower than semiconductors, and that's what brings it down. I think that you'd have to be paying like basically nothing in other electronic manufacturing for that to be the case, so I'm going to throw out that hypothesis. I think probably the more meaningful one is the differences in wages between semiconductor manufacturers and at fabless design firms. So like NVIDIA, like the average salary for an NVIDIA employee is pretty absurd. I read recently that 75% of the company, they're all millionaires. There's like a $300,000 a year annual average wage. So obviously at that 1/3, remember this previous slide here, 1/3 are in fabless design and the rest are in manufacturing. The fabless design is really raising that average, and there's the lawyer salaries and whatnot as well. Yeah, so back to this slide. So I brought this up to date. So if you look at 2024, the average annual mean wage for production workers is about $50,000 according to BLS data. So slightly higher, but still like way lower than what the industry reports say. And while we're here, I think it's worth also pointing to the employment growth numbers. So I pulled this all again from BLS data, and in 2019, there were 362,450 workers in semiconductor and other electronic product manufacturing, right? That number is up to 395,000 in 2024. So that's like pretty significant growth. It looks pretty good. So a jump of what, like 34,000 workers. So definitely a growing industry. But unfortunately, the fastest growing category of worker is managers. Managers jumped 8,000 jobs from 2019 to 2024, from 31,000 to 38,000. And I don't know if that's a sign of a healthy industry that management is the fastest growing category of employment. All right, now getting to workplace safety. This is also from the industry. This is from the Semiconductor Industry Association. The gist is that working in semiconductor manufacturing is pretty safe, right? That's what you'd expect from an industry report. And this is from OSHA data. So OSHA has something called the injury tracking application, and it tracks a number of injuries in different sectors using the same industry codes as the BLS. And as you can imagine, injuries in semiconductor and other electronic manufacturing, in general, are lower than in other manufacturing, right? You're much less likely to, I don't know, injure your foot or like injure your back or something in semiconductors than in a lot of manufacturing. You can understand like how working with heavier equipment sometimes and other kinds of manufacturing would be more physically dangerous. And so the blue is, the blue is lost time injuries. The red are light duty injuries, so you're still working, but you're just got different tasks. And then the orange is all other cases. And in all manufacturing, you know, there's about 3 and some change injuries per 100 FTEs in 2024, and in computer and electronic manufacturing, it's a lot lower. So in that case, and just like overall injuries, you could say, yes, it's probably in general safer to work in semiconductor manufacturing. However, if you drill down into the numbers a little bit, the numbers in computer and electronic product manufacturing are just so much lower than other manufacturing in general, right? Like just the general product of injuries, the skin irritations, the respiratory conditions. But then you look at this other category, and it's like double what other manufacturing is. So what's that about? So this is from Form 300, which is what OSHA uses to report injuries, and you can see this is the other category. So chemical exposure, decompression sickness, ionizing radiation, non-ionizing radiation, all the stuff that we talked about before. So while you're less likely to get injured in other ways in semiconductor and other electronic production manufacturing, you are much more likely than in other forms of manufacturing to be exposed to these things. And just a brief look through the news can indicate why that is. All right, I have 1 minute left, so I'll just wrap up. So again, I mainly study logistics and the case of Amazon in particular. And I have a research project where I'm regularly talking to Amazon workers. And one interesting thing is that for the most part, Amazon warehouse employees are very thankful that they have the job that they do. It pays sort of similar to what semiconductor manufacturing does, like between $40,000 and $50,000 a year. It's really hard work. It's not fun work, but you can put your earbuds in and sort of forget about the world. They generally think it's better than working in restaurants or working at Walmart, right? So there is some appreciation for the job. And I feel like this is just one, it's just a general point for discussion, I guess, later. We just live in such a work hellscape in America today. And so jobs at Amazon, jobs in semiconductor manufacturing, they're appreciated by people, right? For people without advanced skills, they're kind of a lifeline, even though that they're barely making enough to live, right? And so there is a kind of disconnect between the way in which some progressive organizations talk about these jobs, specifically at Amazon, which is all about oh, it's horrible worker exploitation, and the way it's experienced by workers themselves, which is not great. They certainly have grievances. They're scared of certain things and they wish they made more, and they're just shocked when they hear about company profits. But it's not the worst thing in the world. And figuring out how to organize in that landscape is sort of the task of semiconductor manufacturing organizing, but also in logistics as well. Thanks so much.
So, good morning. I think it's still morning. Is it? All right. Good morning. I'm Daniel Kotchin from the law firm of Kotchin & Lowe, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm lead counsel in a class action discrimination lawsuit that's pending against TSMC, and that suit is in San Jose, California. That's where it was filed. That's the Northern District of California. I want to talk a little bit about the allegations in that case, but I really want to talk first about how I ended up in this spot and in this case. So, unlike others here, I do not have a long runway in the semiconductor industry. I don't at all. This is my first time ever having experience in any meaningful way with semiconductors. And it's inspiring for me to see individuals like Mark and Sanjeev and Judith in this panel that has spent their careers in this industry fighting the fights that my firm has been fighting since at least 2008. So we have been involved in a series of cases in the IT staffing industry that are really involve exploitation of labor. So I didn't start out as a labor lawyer. I've always practiced class action work. I was introduced to Indian nationals in 2010 that had H-1B visas. And the H-1B visa program, one of the things that may not be known is the visa that individuals that are issued are not owned by the employees, the individuals who are the beneficiaries of the visa. They're owned by the corporate employers. And so there is a huge practice to secure visas by corporations to source labor that is underpaid. Mark talked about wage theft, and Sanjeev talked about wage theft, that are underpaid and put in horrible working conditions, and they displace Americans in the process and non-visa holders. That is a practice that has been going on for at least 20 years, and it has been going on in a very serious way for at least the last 13 years. So the visa employees that we represented were put in situations where they were promised jobs, visa issues to their corporate employer. America, they have an American dream. They want to be here in the U.S. They come to the U.S. There's no job for them. They have to go and find a job, go find paid work for their employer, or else they're going to be deported back to their home country. I couldn't believe that this was happening. Through that work, I got involved, and my firm got involved with other cases against the primary abusers of visa programs, in our views, to source this type of labor and treat employees terribly and displace Americans in the process. We've been at it in a very serious way since 2013. We won a class action trial last October in Los Angeles against what had been the largest user of the H-1B visa program, a firm by the name of Cognizant Technology Solutions, which was the first case of its kind to go to a jury and to win in a jury trial. So through that work, we ended up with TSMC. Because the IT staff, if you look at the IT staffing space and you look at the data as what's happened to the IT staffing space, just like Ben was talking about, and by the way, Amazon right now is the biggest user of H-1B visas, the wages are insanely low. And if you look at outcomes by race, Judith talked about discrimination historically in the semiconductor industry. I would wish I could show you the data on how black employees have fared in IT staffing. It's horrible. It's offensive. If you look at outcomes by race and what's happened with wages and who the beneficiary of it is, it's not the employees necessarily, for example, the visa employees or the Americans who've been displaced, it's the corporations that have been using the program as a means of labor arbitrage. That's what's happened in IT staffing. And right now, I talked about the case that we had against Cognizant. We have active cases against Tesla, against Meta, and against other folks who have used the H-1B visa program and other visa programs as a means, we think, to achieve labor arbitrage and treat employees horribly. So here we are at TSMC. I have 5 minutes left. TSMC, because through that work, we got involved in the TSMC case. And it's a case where, I just want to say a couple things at the outset. I think everyone wants TSMC to succeed here in America. That is, it's helpful to have investment in America. That's a healthy thing. On my Uber ride from the airport here, I was driven by a Somalian man who is now going to school for free to operate semiconductor machinery. There's investment in the U.S. that is absolutely helpful and we could be productive if the right safeguards in place. Mark had a great question in one of his slides. The question that was presented to us now is, to what extent is our government agencies going to hold corporations accountable for standards? And that's what the TSMC case is about. Because on the one hand, we have incredible investment driven by TSMC here in Phoenix, which is great. I love the communities that are developing in North Phoenix that are largely Taiwanese. I think it's really cool. One of my favorite places on this planet is New York and the melting pot. The problem that TSMC faces, in our view, is it has a preference for one type of employee. TSMC is a very proprietary corporation, and it's very distrustful, in our view, of other we'll say Taiwanese, non-Chinese. The outcomes for those individuals at TSMC are not good. TSMC has, here in Phoenix, employs roughly 2,500 people. We allege in our lawsuit about half of them are on visas. We don't know the visas, we don't understand what type of visas are on, but visas are held by the employer. We are very concerned that they are subjecting their workforce here, that is largely Taiwanese, to the same working conditions and wages that we've seen prevail in the IT staffing industry. It's something on the order of like a same song, different verse. And so our case is a class action discrimination case. Under federal discrimination laws, all races, all national origins, all citizens have to be treated equally. And when we allege, these are allegations at this point, we've proven nothing yet, we're in the discovery process, we allege that TSMC has a preference where it prefers not to employ, not to hire non-East Asians, traditionally American employees or black employees or Hispanics, that in the promotion process, if you're not in their preferred category of employee, you're going to be treated much more harshly when it comes to performance reviews or getting promoted, or how you're going to be included in things like meetings in the workplace. For example, Mandarin is spoken routinely And a lot of the employees, the American employees that are there, can't speak Mandarin, so they're shut out of meetings or they're excluded from meetings altogether. And then we also allege that the termination rates are much higher for those who are not in the preferred category than those who are in the preferred category. Those are the allegations in the complaint. This is it's a lawsuit that has that has precedent now in the IT staffing industry. As I said earlier, it's pending in the Northern District of California in San Jose. It's going to extend at least through next year. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you folks have in a breakout session about things. Thank you.
Thank you. And Judith, there is a microphone on the floor available. So, are there any questions for any of our panelists? I see one here in the back. Somebody else had a question.
Well, anyways, hey, my name is Rand Wilson, and I have a question for Dan. What do you mean, two questions. Could you define for me what labor arbitrage means? Because I don't really understand that. And secondly, just at the same time, is the discrimination that TSMC, you're alleging that TSMC is committing, are they also obligated to diversify their H-1B visa program to include, say, Indian nationals or people from Korea, Vietnam? Yeah. Or is it just because of the fact that this is displacing American workers?
Sure. Can I ask a favor? Can someone turn on the lights?
Lights?
Yeah. I think this is it. Oh, they were on before. There. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So labor arbitrage. Labor arbitrage is sourcing labor that's cheaper. You know, if you look at, for example, where a lot of visa employees come from, they come from countries where labor earns something in the order of 10 cents on the dollar compared to what folks here are paid. And so the labor arbitrage that we've seen happen is in the IT staffing industry has largely been sourcing cheap labor here for a finite period. These are not people that are immigrating to America. These are here for 3 to 6 years under visa programs. They're paid a fraction of what is the prevailing wage here, which, by the way, happens to be illegal. It's visa fraud. The federal government has done absolutely nothing about it. That's a conversation. I could talk for 5 hours about what we've done to try to ensure that visa laws are going to be enforced to protect the visa employee and to protect American labor markets. But labor arbitrage is arbitrage like where you're sourcing cheap labor because you don't want to pay American rates. In America, I cannot. If you look at wealth disparities in this country, if you look at wages, the stagnation in wages in the IT industry since 2000, it's insane. The wages, there's something horribly wrong that's happening in this country because the federal government and corporations are not prioritizing protecting labor markets here. That's a huge problem. In terms of the discrimination, the way you prove discrimination in a pattern of practice is one race or national origin preferred over all others. And if it is, that's a problem, no matter what race or national origin that happens to be. So if TSMC, and I do not know their visa practices, I don't, if they're using the visa program to source just one race, just one national origin over all others, to staff here in the U.S. jobs, you're going to have a disparity in outcomes. And that's how you show a pattern or practice of discrimination. Okay?
So Silicon Valley and tech are known for the polarization of the workforce. We call it the hourglass economy. A lot of people at the bottom, a lot of people at the top. And a lot of documentation in Silicon Valley these days talks about how the inequitable distribution of income and wealth. And it's worse than elsewhere, and it's getting worse. But there are a lot of people in Silicon Valley, people working at Google and Apple and a lot of startups, who are at the top. and they've got H-1B visas, and they aren't being treated like the IT workers you represent. So it's important to understand that you've got two types of H-1B workers in this country. Some that are brought in because they're highly skilled, and some that are brought in because they aren't paid well.
I think that's a very fair point. The H-1B visa program is a needed program. We want to, as a country, we want to have a mechanism to attract the best and the brightest. Elon Musk came to the U.S. under an H-1B visa. I think everyone say, whatever you think about Elon Musk, he actually developed stuff that's actually pretty interesting, you know? Although we're now suing Tesla because they're preferring visa employees, so I'm not here to promote Elon Musk, but I am just saying it is an absolute necessary program, I think, for the country to have. The problem that we have faced, and it's like the data is so crazy, is how much it's been used in a way that's contrary to its purpose. And really is to help corporations improve margins, have a captive workforce that they can treat like crap, and it's easy for them then to go forward. I'll go back to Mark's question in his slide. The question I think that we face in the semiconductor industry, in the IT staffing industry, in the country at large is, to what extent is government going to hold industries accountable or let industries run roughshod over the standards? And in my view, we've been here before as a country, and that was during the Industrial Revolution. And we saw how that worked out. We need to return back to we're holding standards. And I found Mark's presentation particularly inspiring to me because he's been doing exactly that type of work in Taiwan. I think that's really cool.
Just real quickly, the first part of my presentation was sort of meant to get to that hourglassing phenomenon that you talked about, and the industry actually uses that to justify itself, right? That $170,000 a year number, that's on average, but the middle's completely fallen out from that number. So there's a little bit of subterfuge there.
Thank you. My question's directed towards Annabelle. My name's Doug Block. I'm with Workshop, and in 2015, I was at the Teamsters Union and joined a coalition with Unite Here and SEIU and working partnerships in San Jose called Silicon Valley Rising. And over the next about 5 years, we were able to organize 10,000 subcontracted workers in all the high-tech campuses throughout Silicon Valley. The economic segregation you talked about was there. These were all low-wage workers of color, and I'm talking about security officers, shuttle bus drivers, and food service workers. Part of the reason why we were successful was we weren't touching their business model. But what we did see, and when I mean that, we weren't organizing their engineers. The costs of these subcontracted services were tiny. What we saw from the companies was they didn't even think about their labor practices. It wasn't even on their radar screen. They were just doing things fast, breaking things, and if it was broken, move on to the next thing and throw money at it. So I guess I want to hear from you a little bit about the culture of Silicon Valley, the history there, and how, to be blunt, labor can break them again like we did.
Thanks a lot, Doug. That was a great question. There were points I wanted to make that I couldn't make because of the time limit. So Silicon Valley Rising is a phenomenal success story for the peripheral, what is considered peripheral workforce in Silicon Valley, not the manufacturing, as you rightly pointed out, and not attacking the business model that is now elsewhere as well, all over Asia. The semiconductor industry and electronics manufacturing writ large is virulently anti-union. And the CEOs and general managers of companies, of all these multinational companies, have gone on record saying that they would rather not have, or not rather, they would like to not have unions. And I can read some quotes. The most infamous quote is from Robert Noyce, who is the co-founder of Intel. Remaining non-union is an essential for survival for most of our companies. This is a very high priority for management here. Morris Chang of TSMC, chairman. The American high-tech sector decided then it would not allow unions. Good companies should be able to request that workers not form unions. Recently, the Intel spokesperson, days after the White House said that they expect Intel won't engage in union busting, quote, "It is our view that union representation and payment of union dues are not necessary at Intel." So this attitude is prevalent globally. As an organizer, I've come across also Samsung union busting, going to villages where our organizers come from and our shop stewards come from, talking to families and intimidating staff of organizations that are trying to organize electronics workers. One thing that we need to remind ourselves in all of this, the fact that, less than 1% of the global electronics manufacturing workforce is unionized, is that this is an attitude that is all-pervasive and it seeps into the day-to-day functioning of the industry. Workers are subjected to all sorts of harassment and retaliation. Recently, in 2024 and earlier this year, thousands of Samsung workers went on strike in India. And the government of India, at the national and state level, came down very hard on the union and management of Samsung to sit down and negotiate. They didn't do that. The workers had three simple requests or demands. First, higher wages. Second, an 8-hour day. And third, a union. They gave them bonuses. They promised shorter work days, but it was a no to unions. They fired 23 of the most active and vocal union members. And till today, those workers are still not reinstated. The thousands of workers, some of whom I met recently in July, are very firm that they want a union. They want worker voice on the job. Let us be very clear. Manufacturing jobs were not magically good jobs earlier, back in the day. They were made good jobs by workers who fought and invested blood, sweat, and tears into union recognition and collective bargaining power. So we cannot expect jobs to turn into good jobs by magic or by even government benevolence, which we won't see very soon. It has to be by building worker power and community power and the coalitions like Silicon Valley Rising. So thank you very much for raising that example.
If I could also add to that, I think that we've seen this very recently prior to this administration taking office under Biden's administration, where the Building Trades Council here in Arizona were really petitioning both the Biden administration and our Democratic senators to intervene in what was perceived as non-compliance or not good faith bargaining or dealings with TSMC, with the argument that we have to be very careful because this is a matter of national security. And so I think that's just another one of the lines that's being used.
Fred, they tell me we've got time for one more question.
Hi, thank you so much for the excellent talks. So I work in the semiconductor industry, and I've seen on the news, instances like the Hyundai workers from Korea, the terrible thing that happened to them at that when they were taken by ICE, and also hear about the administration raising the cost of the H-1B visa to the point where workers, who were planning to leave the country had to, at the last minute, stay in the country for fear of not being able to return. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, when I see these headlines in the news, how that relates to what you're talking about, especially with regards to the visas and the way that companies are using them to exploit workers. What I see the administration, doing at this moment, what is the strategy or the outcome that we should expect?
So, I mean, look, it's a, first of all, what happened in Georgia with the Hyundai thing was bizarre. And that enforcement mechanism was, I've read just the headlines like you, and that just seems totally out of bounds. The H-1B visa, the proposal to increase the fees, if you look at Congress, the political bedfellows on this are really weird. You have Bernie Sanders, you have Dick Durbin, you have Ro Khanna on one side, and you have people like Jeff Sessions and Ted Cruz on the other saying, what's happening, Chuck Grassley from Iowa, what's happening with American labor markets is not right. And so there is recognition, I think, that there's been abuse of the system. How changes are being made is a matter of debate, but I think that everyone would agree on both sides that there needs to be changes. There was a fascinating debate that happened right when Trump was inaugurated this most recent time. You had the tech bros on one side, like Elon Musk and other folks at Silicon Valley, and you had Steve Bannon and the traditional MAGA base on the others that are basically fighting about what to do about H-1Bs. I would recommend that you go back and look at that. That was the most interesting debate. I never saw that one coming. And during that debate, the person who I thought said the quiet part out loud that was really fascinating was Vivek Ramaswamy, who tweeted about how in effect, this is not what he said directly, this is how I interpreted it, American labor markets suck. We need more Whiplash, the movie, less Friends, the TV shows, and we need the labor markets to get serious. And that's why we have to have this program. That's how the program has been being used. And there is the complexity around it. Politically, there's a lot of complexity around it. The effect of how that program's been used is not debatable. Wages are way down. People have been displaced, and the talent, the employees that have been brought over on a temporary basis have been treated in a way that no one should be treated in this country or anyone else. It's indentured. They're indentured. So I understand, it's weird, and it's kind of like you read these headlines, you hear what's happening. For example, with the Hyundai, those were all employees who were supplied by third-party contractors. Those are called body shops. I don't know this for certain, but I bet my life that they were treated horribly here, setting aside the deportation that occurred, which just seemed bizarre to me. So I wish I had a straightforward answer to you, but there's not a straightforward answer to it, except I think that there's general recognition that the program has been abused.